Dark screen, a distant clock ticks ominously, then a single, haunting chime echoes in the shadowy halls of Chipping Manor. A clock strikes at midnight, not 12, but 5, then 3, as if whispering a deadly secret. Flash of an ancient oak clock, its hands frozen, moonlight glinting off a fresh scratch. Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-eyed spinster from St. Mary Mead, arrives at the invitation of Lady Beatrice Harrow, sensing trouble in a house gripped by fear. Miss Marple steps off a train, her gaze piercing the foggy village, as priceless heirlooms vanish sapphire brooches, gold watches, diamond pins, the clock's erratic chimes signal more than time. A thief lurks among the household, quick cuts, a nervous Roland, a trembling Clara, a secretive Dr. Marsh slipping into the woods, whispers of a stranger, John Turner, with a satchel marked JT, haunt the village, while cryptic notes and midnight attacks tighten the noose of suspicion. A shadowy figure flees the summer house, a torn note reading signal flutters to the ground. As Miss Marple unravels a web of greed, betrayal, and hidden compartments, the clock's final chime will unmask a truth so shocking it could silence the manor forever. The clock strikes 12, clear and true, as Miss Marple's eyes gleam, the household frozen in a candlelit hall. Will she stop the thief before the clock strikes again? Chapter 1 **** The invitation to Chipping Manor. Miss Jane Marple sat in her modest parlour in St. Mary Mead, her knitting needles moving with the quiet precision of a metronome. The late morning sun filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns. On the polished oak table, where a cup of tea, now cold, rested beside a pile of correspondence. It was a Thursday in early autumn, and the air held a crispness that hinted at the turning of seasons. Miss Marple's eyes, bright and observant despite her years, scanned a letter that had arrived with the morning post. The envelope bore the crest of Chipping Manor, and the handwriting, elegant but faintly tremulous, belonged to Lady Beatrice Harrow, an old acquaintance from her school days at a finishing school in Florence. The letter was an invitation, but not of the ordinary sort. Beatrice, now widowed and nearing 70, wrote of a weekend gathering at her estate in Chipping Norton, Oxfordshire. The words were polite, yet an undercurrent of unease threaded through them. "My dear Jane," she began, "it has been too long since we shared a quiet chat. I find myself in need of your company and, perhaps, your wisdom. Strange happenings have unsettled my household, and I cannot shake a sense of disquiet. There is a clock here, an old thing, that keeps most peculiar hours. I trust your keen mind might see what I cannot." The letter ended with a plea for Miss Marple to join her the following day, Friday, and included details of a train departing Paddington at noon. Miss Marple folded the letter carefully, her fingers tracing the embossed crest. Beatrice had always been a woman of composure, her life a tapestry of privilege and propriety. For her to admit unease, let alone hint at strange happenings, was significant. The mention of the clock intrigued Miss Marple most. In her experience, objects often held secrets, letters tucked in books, keys hidden in vases, or, perhaps, a clock that chimed when it ought not. Her mind, ever alert to the nuances of human behavior, began to weave possibilities. Was the clock a mere quirk, or did it signal something deeper? And why had Beatrice, after years of sparse contact, reached out now? She rose, her movements sprightly, and crossed to the window overlooking her garden. The dahlias were in full bloom, their vibrant heads nodding in the breeze. Miss Marple's garden was her sanctuary, a place where she observed not only plants, but people, the postman's hurried gait, the vicar's thoughtful pauses, the village children's whispered conspiracies. It was in such quiet moments that she understood the world. For St. Mary Mead, like any village, was a microcosm of human nature. Greed, envy, loyalty, fear, they flourished here as surely as in London's grandest salons. Beatrice's letter suggested such emotions were stirring at Chipping Manor, and Miss Marple felt a familiar tingle of curiosity. She returned to her chair and penned a reply, accepting the invitation. Her nephew, Raymond West, would have called her sleuthing instincts positively gothic, but Miss Marple saw it differently. She did not seek mysteries. They found her, as if drawn by her unassuming presence. She packed a small valise, sensible woolens, a shawl, her knitting, and a copy of The Vicar of Wakefield for the train. By evening, she had informed her maid, Cherry, of her absence and arranged for the vicar's wife to water her geraniums. St. Mary Mead would manage without her for a few days. The next morning, Miss Marple boarded the train at Paddington. The platform buzzed with travellers, businessmen in bowler hats, nannies herding children, and a group of tourists clutching guidebooks. She settled into a second-class carriage, her seat by the window affording a view of the platform's bustle. Across from her sat a young man, perhaps 30, with a lean face and restless hands. He wore a well-cut but slightly worn suit, and his leather satchel, embossed with the initials JT, rested on the seat beside him. His fingers drummed on the satchel's handle, and his eyes darted to the platform as if expecting pursuit. Miss Marple, knitting placidly, noted his agitation. In St. Mary Mead, such behaviour might suggest a man late for choir practice or hiding a debt from his wife. Here, on a train to Oxfordshire, it hinted at something more. The train lurched forward, and London's grimy outskirts gave way to fields dappled with sheep. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her gaze alternating between her knitting and the young man. He opened the satchel once, briefly, revealing a glimpse of papers and something metallic, a watch, perhaps, or a small case. He snapped it shut quickly. Glancing at her, she smiled, her expression one of benign disinterest, and he relaxed slightly, turning to the window. Miss Marple wondered if he was bound for Chipping Norton. Beatrice's letter had mentioned no specific guests, but a household. Like Chipping Manor rarely stood empty. The young man's nervousness suggested he carried a burden, literal or figurative, and Miss Marple filed the observation away. The journey passed uneventfully, save for a brief stop at Reading, where a stout woman boarded, complaining loudly about the price of tea. Miss Marple listened, her ears attuned to the woman's gossip about a local scandal involving a chemist and a missing prescription. Such snippets, she knew, could prove useful, though they often led nowhere. By 1:30, the train pulled into Chipping Norton's small station, its platform bathed in weak sunlight. Miss Marple alighted, her valise in hand, and scanned the crowd. The young man with the satchel hurried past, nearly colliding with a porter, and disappeared into the station's shadows. She made a mental note of his direction toward the village. Not the manor. A chauffeur in a navy cap awaited her, holding a sign reading Miss Marple. He introduced himself as Hawkins, a man of few words with a weathered face. He took her valise and led her to a gleaming Bentley, its polish at odds with the rural simplicity of Chipping Norton. The drive to Chipping Manor wound through lanes, flanked by hedgerows, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. Hawkins drove in silence, but Miss Marple sensed his reserve held more than professional courtesy. "Have you been with Lady Harrow long?" she asked, her tone light. 10 years, ma'am, he replied, his eyes on the road. Since the old lord passed, and the household. Is it a happy one? He hesitated, his knuckles tightening on the wheel. It's a grand house, ma'am. Folks do their duties. His answer, evasive yet polite, told Miss Marple what she needed. All was not well at Chipping Manor. The manor appeared as they crested a hill, its grey stone facade half hidden by ancient oaks. Towers flanked its wings, and ivy clung to the walls like a protective shroud. The grounds were meticulously kept, with rose beds and a gravel drive that crunched under the Bentley's tires. Yet the house exuded a melancholy air, as if its grandeur weighed heavily on its inhabitants. Hawkins parked near the entrance, where a pair of stone lions guarded the steps. As Miss Marple stepped out, a chill wind stirred the leaves, and she pulled her shawl closer. Lady Beatrice Harrow awaited her in the hall, a frail figure in a lavender gown. Her silver hair was pinned elegantly, but her face bore lines of worry that deepened as she clasped Miss Marple's hands. "Jane, my dear, how good of you to come. I scarcely hoped you'd manage it on such short notice." Her voice, though warm, trembled slightly, and her eyes searched Miss Marple's face as if seeking reassurance. "It's no trouble at all," Miss Marple said, smiling. "Your letter was most intriguing, and I've always thought a change of air does one good." Beatrice led her into a drawing room where a fire crackled, casting shadows on portraits of stern-faced Harrows. The room was opulent silk drapes, a Persian rug, a grand piano, yet it felt stifled, as if the air held secrets. Over tea served by a maid with downcast eyes, Beatrice described the household. Her nephew, Roland Harrow, was 32, an artist of modest talent but considerable charm. "He's my late brother's son," Beatrice said. "A dear boy, but reckless with money. He's engaged to Clara Vane, a governess who came to us 2 years ago. She's quiet, almost too quiet, but Roland adores her." Miss Marple nodded, her mind picturing Roland as the village equivalent of young Tommy Pierce, who'd once sold his father's watch to buy a motorbike. "And others in the house," she prompted. "There's Dr. Edwin Marsh, our physician. He's been with us since my husband's illness. A competent man, but fond of solitary walks at odd hours. And Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper. She's been here 30 years, utterly devoted, though she's grown rather secretive lately." Beatrice paused, her teacup clinking against its saucer. "And then there's the clock." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "The clock you mentioned in your letter?" "Yes. It's in the hall, a great oak thing, older than the house itself. It's always kept perfect time, but these past weeks, it's begun striking at midnight irregularly, sometimes 3 chimes, sometimes 7, never 12. It's unnerving, Jane. The servants whisper it's a bad omen." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. In St. Mary Mead, such talk would have been dismissed as superstition, but she knew better than to ignore village law. "Have you had it examined?" "Roland tried to tinker with it, but he's no mechanic. We sent for Mr. Grayson, the village clockmaker, but he found nothing amiss, yet it persists." Beatrice's voice dropped. "I feel it's tied to something. This house, I can't explain it, but I'm afraid." Miss Marple patted her hand. "My dear Beatrice, clocks are curious things. They mark time, but sometimes they reveal it too. Let us see what this one has to say." Beatrice managed a weak smile. "You always had a way of making sense of the nonsensical. Come, I'll show you to your room. You must rest before dinner." The guest room was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the garden. It was furnished with a four-poster bed, a writing desk, and a wardrobe that creaked when opened. The window framed a view of manicured lawns sloping toward a copse of trees, where a summer house stood like a forgotten relic. Miss Marple unpacked her thoughts on words, a clock that chimed erratically, a nervous household. A young man with a satchel was a thread in a tapestry she could not yet see. At 6. A gong summoned the household to dinner. Miss Marple descended the grand staircase, her hand on the polished banister. The hall clock loomed at the foot of the stairs, its face carved with Roman numerals, its pendulum swinging with a soft tick. She paused, studying it. The wood was dark, almost black, and a faint scratch near the base caught her eye. A recent mark, perhaps, or a trick of the light. She resolved to examine it later. The dining room glowed with candlelight, its long table set with silver and crystal. Beatrice introduced the others. Roland Harrow was tall, with tousled hair and a disarming smile. His eyes, however, held a flicker of unease, like a man who'd wagered too much at cards. Clara Vane, his fiancée, was slight, with pale hair and a face that seemed to retreat into itself. She spoke little, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Dr. Edwin Marsh, a man of 50 with a clipped beard, exuded professional calm, though his fingers toyed with his napkin. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, supervised the meal with hawk-like vigilance, her black dress rustling as she moved. Dinner was a strained affair. Roland attempted levity, recounting a tale of a London gallery rejecting his paintings. "They called my work derivative," he said, laughing, "as if anything's original these days." Clara offered a faint smile, but Beatrice's eyes remained fixed on her plate. Dr. Marsh spoke of a medical conference he'd attended, his tone measured but distant. Miss Marple, eating sparingly, observed their interactions. Roland's charm masked tension. Clara's silence suggested fear. Marsh's detachment hinted at secrets, and Mrs. Poole's efficiency bordered on obsession. The conversation turned to the clock. "It woke me again last night," Roland said, his voice sharp. 5 chimes, at midnight, then nothing. "It's enough to drive one mad." "It's an old mechanism," Dr. Marsh said. "Likely a fault in the gears." "Or a ghost," Clara murmured, her first words of the evening. The table fell silent, and she blushed, looking down. "Nonsense," Mrs. Poole snapped, clearing plates with a clatter. "It's a clock, not a spirit." Beatrice glanced at Miss Marple, her expression pleading. Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. "In my village," she said, "we had a clock that chimed oddly. Turned out a mouse had nested in it." Simple things often explain the strange. Roland laughed, but it was forced. "No mice in that beast, I'll wager. It's solid as a vault." After dinner, the party retired to the drawing room for coffee. Miss Marple excused herself, claiming fatigue, but lingered in the hall. The clock stood sentinel, its tick louder now in the quiet. She knelt, her knees protesting, and examined the scratch. She'd noticed. It was fresh, a thin gouge in the wood, as if something had been pried open. A compartment, perhaps. She straightened, her mind racing. In St. Mary Mead, old furniture often hid drawers or panels places for love letters or pilfered coins. What might this clock conceal? She ascended to her room, her steps slow but purposeful. From her window, she saw a figure cross the garden. Dr. Marsh, she thought, his coat flapping in the wind. He vanished into the trees, his gait purposeful. Miss Marple frowned. A doctor walking for health was one thing. A doctor skulking at night was another. she sat at the writing desk, her knitting untouched, and jotted notes in a small book. Satchel man, nervous, JT clock, scratch, possible compartment. Beatrice, afraid. Roland, reckless. Clara, silent. Marsh, secretive. Poole, loyal. Each was a piece of a puzzle, and the clock, she sensed, was its center. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where a grandfather clock had hidden a stolen will, its chimes timed to distract. Was this clock a distraction? A signal or a hiding place? At 10, she prepared for bed, but sleep eluded her. She sat by the window, her shawl about her shoulders, watching the garden. The moon cast silver light, and the summer house glowed faintly. At 11, a flicker of movement caught her Arja's shadow near the roses, too brief to identify. She waited, her breath steady, until the hall clock began to chime. It struck midnight, then paused, only to chime 3 times more. The sound was deep, almost mournful, and it echoed through the house. Miss Marple rose, slipped on her dressing gown, and opened her door. The corridor was dark, save for a sliver of light from Roland's room. She heard footsteps below, soft but hurried. Creeping to the staircase, she saw a figure in the hall, silhouetted against the clock. It was Clara, her nightdress pale, her hands clutching something, a book, perhaps, or a letter. She moved toward the drawing room and vanished. Miss Marple descended, her slippers silent on the carpet. The drawing room door was ajar, and she heard a whisper, Clara's voice, trembling. "It must stop, Roland. I can't bear it." A man's voice, low and urgent, replied, but the words were indistinct. Miss Marple retreated, her heart quickening. Clara's fear, Roland's secrecy, the clock's chimes, each pointed to a mystery deeper than a faulty mechanism. Back in her room, she locked the door and sat by the window. The garden was still, but the night felt alive with secrets. She thought of the young man with the satchel, his initials JT burning in her memory. Was he a stranger, or did he know Chipping Manor? And the clock, its chimes, were no accident. She was certain, in St. Mary Mead, she'd once solved a theft by noticing a clock's silence. Here, it was the clock's voice that spoke. She opened her book and wrote, "Clock chimes, signal or distraction." Clara, afraid, hiding something. Roland, involved. Shadow, in garden. Marsh. JT, outsider or accomplice. She closed the book, her mind clear despite the hour. Tomorrow, she would visit the village, speak to the clockmaker, and watch the household closely. For now, she extinguished her lamp and lay in the dark, listening to the manor's creaks and sighs. Somewhere, the clock ticked on, its rhythm a challenge to her wits. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Mysteries, like knitting, required patience. A dropped stitch could unravel a pattern, and a single clue could unravel a crime. She drifted to sleep, dreaming of clocks and shadows, certain that Chipping Manor held both in abundance. Chapter 2, ***. The midnight disturbance. The night enveloped Chipping Manor like a velvet curtain, its silence broken only by the occasional creak of old timbers settling in the autumn chill. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in her guest room overlooking the garden, sat by the window, her shawl draped over her shoulders. The moonlight cast long shadows across the lawn, and the distant summer house stood like a pale ghost against the dark trees. Her knitting lay untouched on the bedside table, for sleep was far from her mind. The events of the evening, anxious plea, the strained dinner, Clara's whispered fear. and the hall clock's ominous presence had set her thoughts racing. In St. Mary Mead, she had learned that night often revealed what day concealed, and tonight, she sensed, would be no exception. The house had grown quiet after dinner, the household dispersing to their rooms with murmured good nights. Miss Marple had lingered in the drawing room, ostensibly to finish her tea, but in truth to observe. Roland Harrow had been restless, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair as he spoke of a new painting he planned to start. Clara Vane, his fiancée, had hovered near him, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting an intrusion. Dr. Edwin Marsh had excused himself early, claiming a need to review medical notes, though Miss Marple noted his medical bag remained unopened. By the hearth, Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, had supervised the clearing of coffee cups with a vigilance that bordered on ferocity, her sharp gaze missing nothing. Beatrice, pale and withdrawn, had retired soon after, pressing Miss Marple's hand with a silent entreaty. Now, alone in her room, Miss Marple reflected on the clock. Its erratic chimes, described by Beatrice as a recent phenomenon, suggested more than a mechanical fault. In her village, a clock that misbehaved often pointed to tampering, a child's prank, a servant's neglect, or, once, a deliberate signal in a smuggling scheme. The scratch she'd noticed on the clock's base, fresh and precise, hinted at a hidden purpose. She recalled Beatrice's mention of a clockmaker, Mr. Grayson, who had found nothing amiss. Yet the chimes persisted, and Miss Marple wondered if the clock's voice was meant to distract or communicate. At 11:30, she rose and opened her window, letting the cool air sharpen her senses. The garden was still, save for a faint rustle in the roses burr, perhaps a fox or something more human. She strained her eyes, but the shadows yielded no secrets. Closing the window, she slipped into her dressing gown and sat on the edge of the bed, her ears attuned to the house. The manor, for all its grandeur, was a labyrinth of soundspipes, groaning, floors creaking, and, beneath it all, the steady tick of the hall clock, as midnight approached. She felt a tightening in her chest, not of fear but of anticipation. The clock began to chime, its deep, resonant tone echoing through the walls. 1, 2, 3. It paused, then struck twice more, a discordant afterthought. 5 chimes, not 12. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The irregularity was no accident. It was a pattern, deliberate or not, and patterns always led somewhere. She rose, her slippers silent on the rug, and opened her door a crack. The corridor was dark, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and lavender. A faint light flickered below, perhaps from the hall. She stepped into the corridor, her movements cautious but assured. The staircase loomed ahead, its banister gleaming faintly. As she reached the landing, a sound stopped her, soft thud, like a book falling, followed by hurried footsteps. She peered over the railing and saw a figure in the hall, moving swiftly toward the front door. The silhouette was tall, masculine, but the dim light obscured details. Was it Roland, restless as he'd been at dinner? Or Dr. Marsh, returning from one of his nocturnal walks? The figure paused by the clock, and Miss Marple held her breath, expecting another chime. None came. The figure slipped out the door, leaving it ajar, and a gust of cold air swept through the hall. Miss Marple descended, her hand steady on the banister. The clock's face glowed faintly in the moonlight streaming through a window, its hands frozen at 10 past midnight. She examined the base again, the scratch now unmistakable, a thin, deliberate mark, as if a tool had pried something open. She knelt, her knees protesting, and ran her fingers along the wood. A panel, perhaps. Her search was interrupted by a voice behind her. "Miss Marple, whatever are you doing?" It was Roland, his hair dishevelled, his dressing gown loosely tied. His eyes were wide, but whether from surprise or guilt, she could not tell. "I heard the clock," she said, rising with a smile. "It's most curious, don't you think? 5 chimes tonight. Last night you said it was different." Roland ran a hand through his hair, his laugh unsteady. "It's driving us all to distraction. I came down to see if I could stop the blasted thing." He moved toward the clock, but Miss Marple stepped forward. Her presence gentle but firm. "Best not to tamper with it," she said. "Old clocks are delicate. Perhaps Mr. Grayson should look again." Roland hesitated, then nodded. "You're right, of course. I'm no good with mechanics." His eyes flickered to the front door, still ajar. "Did you see someone go out?" "I thought I heard footsteps," Miss Marple said vaguely. "But my hearing isn't what it was." She watched him closely, noting the tension in his jaw. He was hiding something, she was certain. But pressing him now would yield nothing. Clara appeared at the top of the stairs, her nightdress ghostly in the dim light. "Roland, what's happened?" Her voice trembled, and her hands clutched the banister. "I heard the clock hand, then a noise." "Just the wind, dear," Roland said quickly, ascending to her. Miss Marple was curious about the clock. "That's all." Clara's eyes met Miss Marple's, and for a moment fear flashed in them. "It's awful," she whispered. "It wakes me every night." Miss Marple smiled kindly. "A good night's sleep will set us all right. Shall we return to our rooms?" She ushered them upstairs, her mind cataloguing their reactions. Roland's evasiveness, Clara's fearage, was a thread in the mystery. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat at the writing desk, her notebook open. She wrote, "Clock, 5 chimes, deliberate, figure at door, Roland or Marsh." Clara, awake, frightened, scratch on clock, panel. She paused, recalling the young man with the satchel from the train. His initials JT nagged at her. Had he been at the manor, or was he a separate piece of the puzzle? In St. Mary Mead, strangers often brought trouble, a peddler with stolen silver, a lodger with a false name. She resolved to inquire in the village tomorrow. Sleep still eluded her, so she returned to the window. The garden was quiet now, but a faint glow caught her Ajar cigarette's ember, perhaps near the summer house. She watched until it vanished, wondering who else was restless tonight. Dr. Marsh, with his solitary walks, or someone else unseen. The next morning, breakfast was served in the dining room. The table laden with silver dishes of kedgeree, toast, and marmalade. Beatrice was pale, her hands trembling as she poured tea. "Did you hear the clock, Jane?" she asked. It woke. "Me again, 5 chimes. So strange." "I heard it," Miss Marple said, buttering her toast. "Most curious. I think I'll visit Mr. Grayson today. A clockmaker might shed light on it." Roland, entering late, looked haggard. "Good luck with Grayson. He's a dear old sort, but he knows clocks." He avoided Miss Marple's gaze. Focusing on his coffee, Clara, silent as ever, picked at her food. Dr. Marsh was absent, and Mrs. Poole, serving with her usual efficiency, muttered about his early calls. Miss Marple noted the housekeeper's tight lips, as if she guarded a secret. In St. Mary Mead, housekeepers often knew more than they told. Mrs. Bantry's cook had once overheard a blackmail plot in the pantry. After breakfast, Miss Marple donned her coat and hat, her valise replaced by a sturdy umbrella. Hawkins drove her to the village, his silence as impenetrable as the day before. Chipping Norton's High Street was alive with market stalls, the air filled with the scent of fresh bread and apples. Grayson's shop was a narrow building, its sign faded, its windows dusty. Inside, clocks ticked in a cacophony of rhythms, from delicate mantelpieces to towering grandfathers. Mr. Grayson, a stooped man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted her with a nod. "You're from the manor," he said, wiping his hands on an apron. "Come about that clock, I reckon." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "Lady Harrow says it's been troublesome. 5 chimes last night, at midnight." Grayson frowned, adjusting his spectacles. "I looked at it last month, cleaned the gears, oiled the works. It's sound as ever. Never heard of it chiming 5. Though he hesitated, then added, "Found something odd when I worked on it. A compartment in the base, hidden behind a panel. Empty, mined, but polished, like it's been used." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "A compartment? How fascinating. Did you mention it to anyone at the manor?" "Only Mrs. Poole. She said it was likely for weights, but it didn't look like that to me. Too small, too neat." Grayson's tone suggested he'd puzzled over it since Miss Marple thanked him and stepped into the street, her mind buzzing. A hidden compartment could hold anything: letters, jewels, or secrets. She recalled the scratch on the clock, now certain it marked the panel. But who had used it, and for what? Roland, with his debts. Clara, hiding her fear. Or someone else, like the mysterious JT. She stopped at the post office, where the postmistress, a chatty woman named Mrs. Elton, was sorting letters. "Good morning," Miss Marple said. "I'm visiting Lady Harrow. Have you seen a young man, about 30, with a leather satchel? He was on the train yesterday." Mrs. Elton's eyes lit up, eager for gossip. "I saw him 2 days ago, sending a parcel to London. Looked nervy, kept checking his watch. Had initials on his bag, JT, I think. Not from here, that's certain." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions confirmed. The man was no mere traveller. She bought a postcard to send to Raymond West, asking him to check London pawnshops for recent parcels. If JT was involved, he might have sent something from the manor. Returning to Chipping Manor, she found Beatrice in the library, sorting old letters. "Jane, any news from Grayson?" Beatrice asked, her voice hopeful. "He's most thorough." Miss Marple said, "He mentioned a compartment in the clock. Did you know of it?" Beatrice frowned. "No, but it's an old piece. My husband's grandfather brought it from France. It's full of quirks." Her hands shook, and Miss Marple sensed she was withholding something at lunch. Dr. Marsh joined them, apologizing for his absence. "A patient in the village," he explained. But his eyes avoided Miss Marple's. She noted his medical bag, now on the floor, its clasp slightly ajar. Clara ate little, her gaze fixed on Roland, who spoke loudly about a new art exhibition. Mrs. Poole moved silently, her presence almost spectral. That afternoon, Miss Marple strolled in the garden, her umbrella tapping the gravel path. The sun intrigued her, its windows dark and uninviting. She peered inside, finding only dust and a broken chair. Yet the ground nearby was disturbed, as if someone had walked there recently. She bent down, her eyes catching a glint of small metal pin, like those used in clocks. She pocketed it, her mind linking it to the compartment Grayson described. As dusk fell, the household gathered for tea. Roland was absent, claiming a headache, and Clara excused herself early. Dr. Marsh spoke of a new medical journal, but his hands fidgeted, and Miss Marple noticed a smudge of dirt on his cuff. Mrs. Poole served scones with a scowl, muttering about untidy guests. Beatrice, increasingly frail, confided in Miss Marple. "I found a letter this morning, Jane, anonymous, slipped under my door. It said, 'The clock knows all.' What can it mean?" Miss Marple's heart quickened. An anonymous letter was a classic sign of malice or fear. "May I see it?" she asked. Beatrice produced a crumpled note, written in block letters on cheap paper. "The clock knows all. Midnight reveals." Miss Marple studied it, noting the ink's faint smear, as if written in haste. "Keep this safe," she said, "and tell no one." That evening, she sat in the drawing room, her knitting a pretext for observation. Roland returned, his mood lighter, but his eyes darted to the clock as it struck 9. Clara read a book, her fingers trembling on the pages. Dr. Marsh excused himself for a walk, his coat slung over his arm. Mrs. Poole polished silver in the corner, her movements mechanical. At 11. Miss Marple retired, but she did not undress. She sat by the window, watching the garden. A figure moved near the summer house. Dr. Marsh, she was certain, his coat unmistakable. He lingered, then vanished into the trees. She waited, her notebook open. At midnight, the clock chimed again 4 times, then a pause, then one more. A scream followed, sharp and piercing, from the garden. Miss Marple hurried downstairs, finding Beatrice in the hall, clutching her shawl. "Jane, it's Clarucius in the garden." The household gathered, Roland leading the way with a lantern. In the summer house, Clara lay slumped, a bruise on her temple, her sketchbook beside her. Dr. Marsh, arriving breathless, examined her. "She's alive," he said, struck, but not badly. Miss Marple knelt, her eyes scanning the scene. Near Clara's hand was a torn scrap of paper, the word midnight scrawled in ink. She slipped it into her sleeve, her mind racing. The chimes, the scream, the note each was a piece of a puzzle, and the clock was its heart. As Roland carried Clara inside, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze on the summer house. The pin she'd found, the compartment, the anonymous letter, pointed to a secret hidden in plain sight. In St. Mary Mead, a scream had once led to a stolen necklace. Here, it might lead to something darker. She returned to her room, her notebook filling with questions. For chimes, a signal. Clara, attacked or staged. Marsh, in the garden. Note, threat or warning. JT, connected. She sat by the window, the manor silent now, but the clock's tick echoed in her mind. Tomorrow she would probe deeper, for midnight had indeed revealed something, a crime, perhaps, or the shadow of one. Chapter 3, The Clockmaker's Tale, the morning after Clara's alarming discovery in the summer house. Chipping Manor awoke to a heavy mist that clung to its ivy-clad walls like a shroud. Miss Jane Marple, having slept little, rose early, her mind a whirl of questions. The clock's erratic chimes, Clara's bruise, the anonymous note, and the shadowy figure in the garden formed a tapestry of intrigue, each thread demanding her attention. In St. Mary Mead, she had once unraveled a theft by tracing a single button to a tailor's shop. Here, she sensed the clock itself held the key, and Mr. Grayson, the village clockmaker, might provide the first clue. She dressed in her sensible tweed coat and hat, her umbrella a necessary companion in the damp air. At breakfast, the dining room was subdued. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her face etched with worry, sipped tea with trembling hands. Roland Harrow, pale and distracted, pushed his eggs about his plate, his usual charm absent. Clara Vane, her temple marked by a faint bruise, sat silently, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Dr. Edwin Marsh, composed but watchful, commented on Clara's condition, assuring all she needed rest. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, moved with her customary efficiency, though her sharp glances suggested she, too, felt the house's unease. Miss Marple, eating lightly, observed them all, her mind noting Roland's avoidance of Clara's gaze and Marsh's overly calm demeanor. "I thought I might visit the village this morning," Miss Marple announced, buttering a slice of toast. "Mr. Grayson's shop sounds most interesting. A clockmaker's perspective might explain our troublesome timepiece." Beatrice nodded, her relief evident. "A good idea, Jane. Grayson's been in the village forever. If anyone understands that clock, it's he." Roland glanced up, his fork pausing. "Grayson's a bit of an eccentric, mind you. Loves his clocks more than people." His tone was light, but his eyes flickered with unease, and Miss Marple wondered if he feared what Grayson might reveal. Hawkins, the chauffeur, drove her to Chipping Norton, the Bentley's wheels crunching on the gravel drive. The mist had lifted slightly, revealing fields dotted with sheep and stone walls. Hawkins, as taciturn as ever, answered Miss Marple's gentle questions with monosyllables. "Known Grayson long?" she asked. "Years," he replied, his eyes on the road. "Keeps to himself, and visitors to the manor." "Any strangers lately?" He hesitated, then said, "Not my place to say, ma'am." His reticence, like Mrs. Poole's, hinted at loyalty or secrecy. Miss Marple filed it away, her thoughts returning to the young man with the satchel. J.T., whose nervous demeanor on the train lingered in her memory. Chipping Norton's High Street was quieter than the previous day. The market stalls half empty. Under the grey sky, Grayson's shop stood at the far end, its sign reading Grayson and Son. Clockmakers since 1840. The window displayed a jumble of timepieces, brass carriage clocks, pocket watches, a cuckoo clock frozen mid-call. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and old wood, and a symphony of ticks filled the space. Mr. Grayson, a wiry man in his 60s with a shock of white hair and spectacles perched precariously, was bent over a workbench, a loop pressed to one eye. He looked up as the bell jingled, his expression wary. "From the manor, aren't you, Lady Harrow's guest?" "Miss Marple," she said, her smile disarming. "I'm told you know the hall clock well. It's been causing quite a stir." Grayson set down his tools, wiping his hands on a rag. "Aye, that old beast. Repaired it 6 months back. Never seen one like it, French, 18th century, with a mechanism complex as a maze. Worked fine then, but Lady Harrow says it's gone queer, chiming odd numbers at midnight. For last night, with one more after a pause, Miss Marple said, watching his reaction, "You found nothing wrong when you examined it?" He frowned, adjusting his spectacles. "Not a thing. Gears were sound, weights balanced. But I did find something peculiar." He leaned closer, his voice lowering. "There's a compartment in the base, hidden behind a panel. Took me an hour to spot it. Empty when I looked, but the inside was polished, like it had been used lately. Not for weights or tools too small, too cunning." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. The scratch she'd seen on the clock's base flashed in her mind. Did you tell anyone at the manor about this compartment? Only Mrs. Poole, she said. It was likely for spare parts, but I've seen enough clocks to know better. That compartment was made to hide something, letters, maybe, or jewels. He paused, his gaze sharp. Mind, I saw Dr. Marsh near my shop a week ago, late at night. Said he was walking, but he lingered by the window, looking at that old clock I've got in the display. Odd for a doctor. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A hidden compartment, Dr. Marsh's nocturnal wanderings, the clock's erratic. Chimes each piece fit into a puzzle she was only beginning to see. Have you noticed any strangers in the village? A young man, perhaps, with a leather satchel. Grayson's brow furrowed. Can't say I have, but Mrs. Elton at the post office, she sees everyone. Ask her, thanking him. Miss Marple stepped into the street, her umbrella tapping the cobbles. Grayson's revelation about the compartment confirmed her suspicions. The clock was more than a timekeeper. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden drawer in a desk had once held a poisoner's diary. Here, the clock might conceal something equally damning. Dr. Marsh's presence near the shop intrigued her. His walks, always at night, suggested more than a need for fresh air at the post office. Mrs. Elton was sorting parcels, her chatter as lively as the day before. Back again, Miss Marple. What's the manor got you chasing now? Miss Marple smiled. Just a bit of village history. Mr. Grayson mentioned the clock's peculiarities. Have you seen anyone unusual lately? A young man with a satchel, perhaps, initials JT. Mrs. Elton's eyes lit up. Oh, him. Saw him 3 days ago, posting a parcel to London. Nervy sort, kept looking over his shoulder. Satchel had JT on it, clear as day. Asked for express delivery, paid extra. Not local, I'd wagered to Fidgety for Chipping Norton. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The parcel could be key-stolen goods, perhaps, or documents. Did he say where he was staying? No, but he asked for directions to the Red Lion. Inn, might try there. Mrs. Elton leaned closer, her voice conspiratorial. Heard from the baker that someone's been snooping round the manor at night. Not saying it's your man, but it's queer, ain't it? Miss Marple thanked her and bought a stamp, her mind linking JT's parcel to the clock's compartment. The Red Lion Inn was her next stop, a squat building with a creaking sign. The landlord, a burly man named Mr. Tate, was polishing glasses behind the bar. A young man with a satchel, he said, scratching his chin. I had one like that. Called himself John Turner. Stayed one night, left yesterday. Paid in cash, kept to himself. Seemed in a hurry to catch the morning train. John Turner, JT, Miss Marple's suspicions solidified. He was no casual visitor, and his departure suggested urgency. She returned to the manor, her umbrella shielding her from a sudden drizzle. Hawkins drove in silence, but she sensed his curiosity, as if he knew more than he let on. At the manor, lunch was a tense affair. Beatrice announced a new development. Her sapphire brooch, a family heirloom, was missing from her jewelry box. It was there 2 days ago, she said, her voice breaking. I can't think how it's gone. Roland's face tightened, and he pushed his chair back. Probably misplaced, Aunt Beatrice. You know how cluttered your room is. Clara, pale, said nothing, but her hands twisted in her lap. Dr. Marsh offered to search the house, his tone professional but detached. Mrs. Poole, clearing plates, muttered about careless maids. Miss Marple, sipping her soup, noted their reactions. In St. Mary Mead, a missing brooch had once led to a maid's dismissal, only for it to be found in a magpie's nest. Here, she suspected human hands. After lunch, she lingered in the hall, examining the clock again. The scratch was clearer in daylight, a thin line along a seam. She pressed gently, but the panel held firm. A lock, perhaps, or a hidden catch. She recalled Grayson's words, polished, used lately. The brooch could fit such a space, but why hide it in a clock? She found Beatrice in the library, sorting more letters. "Jane, I'm at my wit's end," Beatrice confessed. "First the clock, now the brooch. I feel as if the house is turning against me." Miss Marple patted her hand. "In my village, we once lost a silver spoon, only to find it in a drawer we'd checked thrice. Things turn up, my dear. Tell me, who has access to your rooms?" "Clara, to tidy my things." "Mrs. Poole, of course. Roland sometimes, to borrow books. And Dr. Marsh, when he checks my health." Beatrice's eyes widened. "You don't think—" "I think nothing yet," Miss Marple said gently, "but I'll keep my eyes open." That afternoon, she walked the garden, her umbrella tapping the path. The summer house, where Clara had been found, was locked, but she peered through a window, seeing only cobwebs and a faded rug. The disturbed earth she'd noticed yesterday was trampled further, as if someone had returned. She found another pin, smaller, near the door, a clockmaker's tool, perhaps. She pocketed it, her mind circling back to the compartment. At tea, Roland was absent, and Clara, still shaken, spoke little. Dr. Marsh discussed a new patient, but his eyes strayed to the window, as if watching the garden. Mrs. Poole served with a scowl, her hands trembling slightly. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, asked casually, "Does anyone in the house repair clocks?" "I found a curious pin in the garden, like one a clockmaker might use." The room stilled. Clara's cup clinked against its saucer, and Marsh's spoon paused mid-stir. "Roland's been poking at the clock," Mrs. Poole said sharply. "Foolish boy, thinks he's a mechanic." "Curiosity is no crime," Miss Marple said, her tone light. But her eyes missed nothing. Clara's flush, Marsh's sudden focus on his tea, Beatrice's nervous glance. That evening, she sat in the drawing room, her knitting a pretext for observation. Roland returned, claiming a walk in the village, but his boots were clean, suggesting no such outing. Clara read by the fire, her fingers turning pages too quickly to be reading. Dr. Marsh excused himself for another walk, his medical bag in hand. Miss Marple watched him go, noting the bag's weight. It was heavier than yesterday. At 11, she retired, but remained alert. She opened her notebook, adding, "Compartment, used for brooch. J.T., John Turner, parcel to London. Marsh, near shop, hiding what? Pins, clock tools, note, threat or clue." She sat by the window, watching the garden. A figure moved near the summer house. Roland, she thought, his silhouette distinct. He lingered, then vanished into the trees. At midnight, the clock chimed 6 times, then a pause, then 2 more. A thud followed, not a scream, from the hall. Miss Marple hurried downstairs, finding Mrs. Poole by the clock, a dustpan in hand. "Dropped a vase," she said, her voice sharp. "Clumsy of me." Miss Marple smiled, easily done. "The clock seems lively tonight, 6 and 2. Mrs. Poole's eyes narrowed. "It's a nuisance, that's all." She swept up the shards and retreated, but Miss Marple noted the vase was intact, tucked in a corner. Returning to her room, she wrote, "Poole, lying about vase, hiding something. Chimes, 6 and 2, a code. The clockmaker's tale had opened a door, but the manor's secrets were still locked. Tomorrow, she would probe further Roland's debts, Clara's fear, Marsh's walks, and the elusive JT in St. Mary Mead. A clock's chime had once betrayed a thief. Here, it might unmask something far darker. Chapter 4, Shadows. In the garden, the mist that had cloaked Chipping Manor in the early hours had dissipated by mid-morning, leaving the grounds bathed in a pale, watery sunlight that did little to lift the oppressive air within the house. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her guest room, reviewed her notebook, its pages now dense with observations. The clock's erratic chimes, the missing sapphire brooch, Clara's attack, the anonymous note, and the elusive John Turner each was a fragment of a larger design, and Miss Marple felt the threads drawing tighter. In St. Mary Mead, she had once solved a murder by noting a misplaced flower pot. Here, the garden itself seemed to whisper secrets, and she resolved to explore it before the day grew old. Breakfast had been a somber affair, the dining room heavy with unspoken tensions. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness, had spoken little, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Roland Harrow, attempting levity, had joked about the weather, but his laughter rang hollow, and his gaze darted to the window as if expecting an unwelcome visitor. Clara Vane, her bruise now a faint purple mark, ate sparingly, her hands trembling when Roland addressed her. Dr. Edwin Marsh, ever the composed physician, had remarked on Clara's recovery, but his fingers lingered on his medical bag, its clasp glinting in the morning light. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, had served with her usual precision, though her sharp eyes missed nothing, and Miss Marple noted a faint tremor in her hands as she poured coffee. The household, it seemed, was a clock wound too tightly, ready to spring. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, had mentioned her plan to walk the grounds. "The garden looks charming," she said, her tone mild. "A stroll might clear my head after last night's disturbance." Beatrice managed a weak smile. "Do be careful, Jane. The paths are uneven, and the summer house is rather neglected." Roland glanced up, his fork pausing. "Neglected? It's a ruin, Aunt Beatrice. I keep saying we should tear it down." His tone was casual, but his eyes flicked to Clara, who looked down quickly. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "Oh, I don't mind a bit of decay. Old places have stories, don't they?" She watched Roland closely, noting the faint tightening of his jaw. Clara's silence, too, was telling her. Fear seemed to deepen in Roland's presence. After breakfast, Miss Marple donned her coat and hat, her umbrella tucked under her arm. Hawkins, the chauffeur, offered to drive her to the village, but she declined, preferring to walk the grounds alone. The garden was a sprawling affair, with rose beds, a sunken herb garden, and a gravel path leading to the summer house. The air was damp, carrying the scent of wet leaves and earth. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning the ground for clues. The disturbed earth near the summer house, noted the previous day, was now marked by fresh footprints, boots, she thought, larger than her own. She knelt, her knees protesting, and found another small metal pin, similar to the one she'd pocketed. Yesterday, it was delicate, like a clockmaker's tool, and she tucked it into her handkerchief, her mind returning to Mr. Grayson's mention of the clock's hidden compartment. The summer house itself was a forlorn structure, its paint peeling, its windows clouded with grime. The door was locked, but a side window was loose, its frame warped. Miss Marple peered inside, seeing the same dusty interior cobwebs, a broken chair, the faded rug. Yet something caught her eye. A scrap of fabric, blue and finely woven, snagged on a splintered board. She retrieved it with her umbrella's tip, noting its quality too fine for a servant's clothing. Perhaps part of a gentleman's coat. Dr. Marsh's navy coat flashed in her mind, but she reserved judgment. In St. Mary Mead, a torn hem had once led to a poacher. Here, it might point to something graver. As she straightened, a rustle in the nearby trees made her pause. She turned, her umbrella raised, but saw only a squirrel darting across the path. The garden, for all its beauty, felt watchful, as if its shadows held eyes. She continued her circuit, noting a side gate half hidden by ivy, its latch rusted but recently used. It led to a lane bordering the woods, a shortcut to the village, she guessed. Had Dr. Marsh taken this path on his nocturnal walks? Or had John Turner, the mysterious JT, slipped through it? Returning to the manor, she found Beatrice in the drawing room, embroidering a cushion cover with unsteady hands. "Did you enjoy your walk, Jane?" Beatrice asked, her voice strained. "Most refreshing," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "The summer house is quite charming, though it's seen better days. Has it been used recently?" Beatrice frowned. "Not that I know of. Clara sketches there sometimes, but it's been months." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just an old woman's curiosity," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "I found a bit of fabric there, rather fine. Perhaps someone dropped it." Needle paused. "Fabric. That's odd. I'll ask Mrs. Poole if the maids have been cleaning there." Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting Beatrice's unease. The brooches' disappearance, the anonymous note, and now the fabric each suggested a secret moving through the house like a current. She excused herself to write a letter to her nephew, Raymond West, asking him to trace the London pawnshop linked to John Turner's parcel. If the brooch had been sent away, Raymond's contacts might confirm it. Lunch was a strained affair, with Roland absent, claiming a painting session in his studio. Clara, pale and withdrawn, answered questions in monosyllables. Dr. Marsh spoke of a new medical theory, but his eyes strayed to the window, as if drawn to the garden. Mrs. Poole, serving soup, was more abrupt than usual, her lips a thin line. Miss Marple, eating lightly, asked, "Does Roland often paint in the garden? The light there must be lovely for an artist." Clara hesitated, then said, "He prefers his studio. The garden's too open." Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple noted the fear in her eyes. After lunch, Miss Marple returned to the hall, drawn again to the clock. Its tick was steady, but the scratch on its base seemed more pronounced in the daylight. She pressed the panel gently, feeling a slight give, but it did not open. A key, perhaps, or a specific touch. She recalled the pins she'd found tools for a lock, or part of the clock's mechanism. She resolved to ask Grayson about them tomorrow. That afternoon, she sat in the library, her knitting a pretext for observation. Beatrice was absent, resting upstairs, and Clara was in the garden, sketching near the roses. Miss Marple watched through the window, noting Clara's nervous glances toward the summer house. Roland appeared, his easel under his arm, and joined her, their conversation inaudible, but tense. Clara shook her head, and Roland gripped her arm, his face hard. Miss Marple's lips pursed. In St. Mary Mead, such gestures often hid guilt a husband's anger, a lover's betrayal at tea. Beatrice announced a new worry, a silver cigarette case. Another family heirloom was missing from the drawing room. "It was my husband's," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't bear these losses." Roland, returning from the garden, flushed at the news. "Another theft. This is absurd. We should search the servants' rooms." Mrs. Poole, pouring tea, stiffened. "The maids are honest, Mr. Roland. I'd stake my life on it." Dr. Marsh intervened, his tone soothing. "Let's not jump to conclusions. It may be misplaced, like the brooch." Miss Marple, sipping her tea, watched their faces. Roland's indignation seemed forced, Clara's silence heavy with fear, Marsh's calm almost too perfect. She recalled the fabric in the summer house. Could it belong to the cigarette cases? "Thief," she asked, "does anyone smoke in the garden?" "I saw a cigarette end near the summer house." The question hung in the air. Clara's cup trembled, and Marsh cleared his throat. "I occasionally smoke there," he said. "Helps me think." Miss Marple smiled. Of course, gardens are so inspiring. But her mind noted the Marsh's cigarette ends were always neatly disposed of, not left in the grass. That evening, dinner was a formal affair, with Beatrice insisting on maintaining tradition despite the household's unease. Roland, dressed in a dinner jacket, spoke of a London art dealer interested in his work, but his eyes strayed to the clock, which struck 7 with unnerving precision. Clara, in a simple grey dress, barely touched her food, her bruise stark against her pale skin. Dr. Marsh, seated beside Miss Marple, discussed a medical case, but his fingers toyed with his napkin. Betraying tension, Mrs. Poole supervised the meal, her presence a silent rebuke to the room's disquiet. After dinner, the party moved to the drawing room, but Miss Marple excused herself, claiming a need for fresh air. She slipped into the garden, her shawl wrapped tightly against the evening chill. The moon was high, casting silver light over the lawn. She moved toward the summer house, her steps silent on the grass. At 10, she saw a figure. Dr. Marsh, she was certain, his navy coat unmistakable, crossing the lawn. He paused by the summer house, looking around, then entered the woods beyond the side gate. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her umbrella a makeshift cane, her heart steady despite the darkness. In the woods, she lost sight of him, but a faint rustle guided her to a clearing. There Marsh stood speaking to a man she didn't recognize. Her thin figure in a dark coat, his face shadowed. Their voices were low, but she caught fragments, payment due and the clock's signal. Marsh handed the man something, a small package, perhaps sand. The stranger vanished into the trees. Miss Marple retreated, her mind racing. Was Marsh involved in the thefts? And who was his companion? Back at the manor, she sat by her window, watching the garden. At 11, another figure appeared. Roland, his silhouette furtive as he moved toward the summer house. He carried something, a box or case, and disappeared inside. Miss Marple waited, her notebook open. At midnight, the clock chimed 7 times, then a pause, then one more. A scream followed, sharp and chilling, from the garden. She hurried downstairs, finding Beatrice in the hall, her face ashen. "It's Clara again," she cried. In the summer house, Roland led the way, his lantern casting wild shadows. Clara lay inside, conscious but dazed, a fresh bruise on her cheek. Dr. Marsh, arriving moments later, examined her, declaring it a minor blow. Miss Marple, kneeling, found a torn scrap of paper near Clara's hand with the word "signal" scrawled in ink. She pocketed it, her eyes scanning the room. The rug was askew, revealing a loose floorboard. She pressed it, hearing a faint click, but did not lift it, not yet. As Roland helped Clara inside, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze on the woods. The scream, the scrap of paper, Marsh's meeting, Roland's furtiveness, each pointed to a conspiracy, centered on the clock. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden floorboard had once concealed a smuggler's cache. Here, it might hold the key to the manor's secrets. She returned to her room, her notebook filling with new entries. Marsh, meeting stranger. Package. Roland, in summer house, hiding what? Clara, attacked again, or staged. Signal, linked to chimes. Floorboard, another compartment. She sat by the window, the manor silent, but alive with secrets. The clock's tick echoed in her mind, a challenge. To her wits, tomorrow she would confront Roland, probe Marsh's alibi, and revisit the summer house. For now, the garden's shadows held their secrets close, but Miss Marple knew that, like a dropped stitch, they would unravel in time. Chapter 5 ** The Satchels. Secret. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Chipping Manor, casting a frail light across the dew-soaked lawns, but within the house, the atmosphere remained as heavy as the mist that had lingered the day before. Miss Jane Marple, seated at the small writing desk in her guest room, reviewed her notebook with the precision of a seamstress examining a delicate embroidery. The clock's erratic chimes, the missing sapphire brooch and silver cigarette case, Clara's repeated attacks, the anonymous note, Dr. Marsh's clandestine meeting, and the elusive John Turner with his initialed satchel formed a complex pattern. Each clue was a stitch, and Miss Marple sensed the fabric of the mystery was close to revealing its design. In St. Mary Mead, she had once traced a stolen locket to a peddler's bag. Here, the satchel of J.T. seemed to hold the key, and she, resolved to pursue it with quiet determination. Breakfast was a subdued affair, the dining room's grandeur at odds with the tension among its occupants. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her face drawn, toyed with a piece of toast, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting unwelcome news. Roland Harrow, his charm frayed, spoke little, his fingers drumming on the tablecloth. Clara Vane, her bruises now. A faint shadow sat with her hands folded, her gaze fixed on her untouched plate. Dr. Edwin Marsh, composed as ever, discussed a medical journal, but his voice lacked conviction, and Miss Marple noted the faint smudge of ink on his cover detail. Absent yesterday. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, served with a grim efficiency, her sharp eyes scanning the room like a hawk's. Miss Marple, nibbling a scone, observed them all, her mind weaving connections between the satchel, the clock, and the garden's shadows. I thought I might visit the village again today, Miss Marple announced, her tone light. The post office intrigues me, such a hub of village life. Perhaps I'll send a card to my nephew. Beatrice nodded, her relief tinged with anxiety. Do take care, Jane. The village is safe, but things are so unsettled here. Roland glanced up, his eyes narrowing. The post office. Not much to see there, Miss Marple. Just Mrs. Elton's gossip. His attempt at nonchalance was unconvincing, and Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in his hand. Clara murmured, "It's a pleasant walk," but her voice was barely audible, and she avoided Roland's gaze. Miss Marple smiled, her expression one of benign curiosity, but her mind was alert. Roland's unease suggested he knew more about John Turner than he let on. Hawkins drove her to Chipping Norton, his silence as impenetrable as ever. The high street was busier today, with villagers bustling about market stalls, their voices mingling with the clatter of carts. Miss Marple alighted at the post office, her umbrella tapping the cobbles. Mrs. Elton, the postmistress, was sorting letters, her face lighting up at the sight of a visitor. Back again, Miss Marple, chasing more village tales. Miss Marple smiled. Just a postcard for my nephew. But I wondered if you'd heard more about that young man with the satchel, John Turner, I believe. Did he receive any letters here? Mrs. Elton's eyes gleamed with the thrill of gossip. John Turner, aye. He came in twice, once to send that parcel, and once to ask if anything had come for him. Nothing had, and he looked proper put out. Said he'd be at the Red Lion Inn, but Mr. Tate says he's gone now. Left a note for someone, though didn't say who. A note. Miss Marple's interest sharpened. Did you see it? Mrs. Elton shook her head. Sealed, it was. He gave it to the barmaid at the Red Lion to pass on. She's a sharp one. Jenny might know more. Miss Marple thanked her and bought a postcard, her mind racing. A note suggested communication, perhaps with someone in the manor. She crossed the street to the Red Lion Inn, where Jenny, a young woman with bright eyes and a quick smile, was wiping tables. John Turner, Jenny said, pausing. Aye, he was here 2 nights ago. Left a note for a gentleman, didn't say who. I gave it to Mr. Tate to hold, but it's gone now. Someone picked it up yesterday. Did you see who? Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle. Jenny frowned. Didn't get a good look. Tall, dark coat, came in late. Could have been anyone from the manor or not. She leaned closer. Heard. There's trouble up there. Missing jewels and such. Miss Marple nodded, her mind linking the note to Dr. Marsh's meeting in the woods. Had Turner been contacting Marsh, or someone else? She returned to the manor, her umbrella shielding her from a light drizzle. Hawkins drove in silence, but his hands tightened on the wheel when she mentioned the Red Lion. And she wondered if he, too, had seen Turner at lunch. Beatrice was absent, resting upstairs, and the mood was tense. Roland, attempting to lighten the atmosphere, spoke of a new painting, but his eyes strayed to the clock, which ticked ominously in the hall. Clara, her hands twisting a napkin, said little, her bruise a stark reminder of the previous night. Dr. Marsh, eating methodically, mentioned a patient in the village, but his cuff, now clean, caught Miss Marple's eye. Mrs. Poole served with a scowl, muttering about thieves in the house. Miss Marple, sipping her soup, asked, Does anyone visit the Red Lion? I hear it's quite lively. Roland's spoon paused. Not my sort of place. Too rough. His tone was dismissive, but his eyes flickered with unease. Clara murmured, I've never been, and looked down quickly. Marsh said nothing, but his fingers tightened on his glass. Miss Marple smiled, filing away their reactions. In St. Mary Mead, a denial often hid a truther villager claiming ignorance of a pub brawl, only to be found there later. After lunch, she lingered in the hall, drawn again to the clock. The scratch on its base was unchanged, but she noticed a faint smudge of grease near the panel, as if someone had touched it recently. She pressed it, feeling the same slight give, but it remained closed. A lock, she was certain, and the pins she'd found suggested a tool. She recalled Grayson's words, polished, used lately. The brooch, the cigarette case, both could fit. Such a space, but why hide them in a clock? She found Clara in the library, sorting books, her movements nervous. Miss Vane, Miss Marple said, her tone kind. You seem troubled. Is it the clock, or something else? Clara's hands trembled, and she dropped a book. It's everything. The clock, the attacks. I don't feel safe here. Her eyes filled with tears, and Miss Marple patted her hand. In my village, Miss Marple said, a young girl was frightened by strange noises. Turned out to be a loose shudder. Sometimes fear hides the truth. If you know anything, my dear, it's best to share it. Clara hesitated, then whispered, Roland's been different. He's worried about money, always talking to someone. In the village, I saw him by the clock once, late at night, doing something to it. Miss Marple nodded, her mind linking Roland's actions to the compartment. Thank you, Clara. Rest now. Things have a way of sorting themselves out. That afternoon, she walked the garden again, her umbrella tapping the path. The summer house was locked, but the loose window allowed a glimpse inside. The rug was still askew, and she noticed a faint mark on the floorboard, a scratch, like the one on the clock. She pressed it with her umbrella, hearing a click, but did not lift it, wary of being seen. The fabric she'd found, the pins, the floorboard all pointed to a hidden cache. Perhaps linked to the clock. AT&T, Beatrice announced another loss, a gold watch. Her late husband's, missing from her bedside table. It's too much, she said, her voice breaking. First the brooch, then the cigarette case, now this. Roland swore under his breath. We need to search the house properly. This can't go on. Mrs. Poole, serving scones, snapped, the servant's aunt. Thieves, Mr. Roland. I'd know if they were. Dr. Marsh, calm as ever, suggested perhaps a guest from outside. The village has its share of strangers. Miss Marple, sipping her tea, watched their faces. Roland's anger, Clara's fear, Marsh's detachment, each was a clue. She asked, does anyone know a John Turner? I heard the name in the village. The room stilled. Roland's cup clinked against its saucer, and Clara's eyes widened. Marsh said smoothly, never heard of him. A traveller, perhaps. Miss Marple smiled, perhaps, but her mind noted their reactions, Roland's unease, Clara's shock, Marsh's quick denial. In St. Mary Mead, a stranger's name had once unmasked a blackmailer. Here, John Turner was no mere passerby. That evening, dinner was formal, with Beatrice insisting on tradition despite the mounting losses. Roland, in a dinner jacket, spoke of a London gallery, but his eyes strayed to the clock, which struck 8 with unsettling clarity. Clara, in a pale dress, ate little, her hands trembling. Dr. Marsh discussed a new treatment, but his fingers toyed with his fork. Betraying tension, Mrs. Poole supervised with a fierce glare, as if daring anyone to question her staff. After dinner, Miss Marple lingered in the drawing room, her knitting a pretext for observation. Roland excused himself, claiming a headache, and Clara followed, her steps hesitant. Dr. Marsh announced a walk, his medical bag in hand, its weight noticeable. Miss Marple watched him go, noting the faint smell of tobacco on his coat knot, the cigarette ends she'd seen in the garden. At 10, she slipped into the garden, her shawl wrapped tightly. The moon cast long shadows, and the summer house loomed dark. She moved silently, her eyes scanning the ground. Near the side gate, she found a cigarette, and not Marsh's brand, but a cheaper one, like those sold at the Red Lion. She pocketed it, her mind linking it to John Turner. At 11, she saw a figure. Roland, she thought, his silhouette furtive moving toward the summer house. He carried a small case, perhaps a paint box, and disappeared inside. She waited, hidden by a rosebush, her heart steady. At midnight, the clock chimed 5 times, then a pause, then 3 more. A rustle followed, not a scream, from the woods. She moved toward the sound, her umbrella a cane, and saw Dr. Marsh emerge from the trees, his coat buttoned tightly. He paused, looking toward the summer house, then hurried to the manor. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her mind racing. The chimes, the cigarette end, Roland's case, Marsh's hastage, was a piece of the puzzle. Back in her room, she opened her notebook, writing, Turner's note, for whom? Marsh, meeting again. Roland, hiding case in summer house. Cigarette, Turner's, chimes, 5 and 3, a code. Floorboard, linked to clock. She sat by the window, the manor silent but alive with secrets. The satchel's secret was close, she sensed, but the clock's tick held the truth. Tomorrow she would confront Clara, probe Marsh's alibi, and search the summer house. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden letter had once revealed a murderer. Here, the satchel might unmask a thief or worse. Chapter 6, Asterisk. The doctor's alabether, dawn light, filtered through the heavy curtains of Chipping Manor, casting a soft glow over the guest room where Miss Jane Marple sat, her notebook open on the writing desk. The events of the previous night, clock's erratic chimes, Roland's furtive visit to the summer house, Dr. Marsh's hasty retreat from the woods, and the cigarette end that hinted at John Turner's presence had woven a complex web in her mind. In St. Mary Mead, she had once unmasked a swindler by noting his polished shoes on a muddy lane. Here, Dr. Marsh's nocturnal wanderings, cloaked in the guise of health walks, demanded scrutiny. His medical bag, always at his side, and his meeting with a stranger suggested a role beyond that of a dutiful physician. Miss Marple, her knitting untouched, resolved to probe his alibi, sensing it was a thread that might unravel the manor's secrets. Breakfast was a strained ritual, the dining room's grandeur overshadowed by the household's unease. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her face pale, sipped tea with unsteady hands, her eyes flickering to the clock in the hall, its tick audible even from the table. Roland Harrow, his charm eroded by fatigue, ate little, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm. Clara Vane, her bruises fading but her demeanor fragile, avoided Roland's gaze, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Dr. Edwin Marsh, impeccably dressed, spoke of a new patient in the village, his tone measured but his eyes wary. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, served with a grim precision, her sharp glances darting between the diners as if guarding a secret. Miss Marple, nibbling a piece of toast, observed them all, her mind noting Marsh's calm facade and the faint scent of tobacco on his coat knot, the cheap brand from the garden, but a finer blend. "I thought I might take another stroll today," Miss Marple said, her voice light. "The village is so quaint, and I'd like to see the church. Perhaps Dr. Marsh could recommend a path, since you walk so often." Marsh's cup paused midway to his lips. "The church is worth a visit," he said smoothly. "The lane by the woods is pleasant, though a bit rough. I walked there myself for exercise." His smile was polite, but his fingers tightened on the cup, and Miss Marple noted the faint ink smudge on his cuff. Now joined by a speck of mud, Beatrice, eager for normalcy, said, "The church has lovely stained glass, Jane. Do go, but mind the uneven stones." Roland, his voice sharp, added, "Marsh's walks must do wonders. You're out every night, aren't you, Doctor?" His tone held an edge, and Miss Marple wondered if Roland suspected Marsh of more than medical duties. Clara murmured, "The woods are dark at night," and looked down quickly, her hands trembling. Miss Marple smiled, her expression benign, but her mind was alert. Marcia's walks, always at odd hours, were no mere exercise, and Roland's barb suggested a rift. After breakfast, Miss Marple donned her coat and hat, her umbrella a steadfast companion. Hawkins offered to drive, but she preferred to walk, needing time to think. The lane to the village wound past the manor's grounds, skirting the woods where she'd seen Marsh the previous night. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She moved slowly, her eyes scanning the ground. Near the side gate, she found another cigarette and chip, like the one from the summer house, confirming her suspicion of John Turner's presence. She pocketed it, her mind linking it to the note he'd left at the Red Lion in the village church. A Norman structure with a squat tower stood at the edge of Chipping Norton. Its graveyard was dotted with weathered stones, and Miss Marple paused to read the inscriptions, her thoughts on the manor's secrets. In St. Mary Mead, a gravestone's date had once revealed a liar's age. Here, the church might hold no clues, but the walk gave her time to ponder Marsh's alibi. His claim of exercise was flimsy, given his late-night meetings and the package he'd handed to the stranger. Inside the church, the vicar, a kindly man named Mr. Fielding, greeted her, a visitor from the manor, Lady Harrow's guest. I presume his eyes were warm, but his hands fidgeted, as if the village's troubles weighed on him. Miss Marple, she said, smiling, I'm admiring your church. Do you see many from the manor here? Mr. Fielding nodded. Lady Harrow attends regularly, and Miss Vane sometimes. Mr. Harrow Rolandrelli, and Dr. Marsh only once or twice. He's a busy man, always walking. About at night. His tone held a hint of disapproval, and Miss Marple's interest sharpened. Walking at night, she said, her tone curious. The woods must be peaceful then. The vicar frowned. Peaceful, perhaps, but not safe. Seen lights there, late at night. Todd for a doctor's rounds. He hesitated, then added, there's talk of strangers, too. A young man was seen near the Red Lion, asking questions. Miss Marple thanked him and stepped outside, her mind buzzing. The vicar's words confirmed her suspicions. Marsh's walks were a cover, and John Turner's presence was no secret in the village. She walked to the Red Lion Inn, hoping to learn more about Turner's note. Jenny, the barmaid, was sweeping the floor, her smile brightening at Miss Marple's arrival. Back again, miss. Still chasing that Turner fellow. Miss Marple chuckled. Just tying up loose ends. You said he left a note for someone. Any chance you saw what was in it? Jenny shook her head. Sealed tight, it was. But the man who took its whole dark coat, came in late, was in a hurry. Looked like he didn't want to be seen. I reckon he was from the manor, but I couldn't swear to it. Miss Marple nodded, her mind picturing Marsh's navy coat, and no one else asked for Turner. Not a soul. But Mr. Tate said he saw Turner talking to someone by the woods, night before he left. Couldn't see who, but they were arguing. Quiet like. Thanking her, Miss Marple returned to the manor, her umbrella tapping the lane. The woods loomed to her left, their shadows deep even in daylight. She paused by the side gate, noting fresh footprints, boots, like those near the summer house. She followed the path a short distance, finding a discarded matchstick, its tip scorched. Not Marsh's brand, but perhaps Turner's. She pocketed it, her thoughts circling back to the doctor's meeting in the woods. At lunch, Beatrice was present but frail, her hands trembling as she spooned soup. Jane, did the church please? You? She asked, her voice thin. Charming, Miss Marple said. The vicar mentioned lights in the woods at night. Most curious, Marsh's spoon paused. Poachers, likely, he said smoothly. The woods are full of game. Roland snorted. Poachers. More likely village lads, up to mischief. His tone was sharp, and Miss Marple noted the glance he exchanged with Clara, who looked down quickly. Mrs. Poole, serving bread, muttered, "No good comes of wandering at night." Her eyes flicked to Marsh, and Miss Marple sensed a hidden accusation. After lunch, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, drawn to the clock. The scratch on its base was unchanged, but she noticed a faint scuff on the floor nearby, as if something heavy had been dragged. She pressed the panel again, feeling the familiar give, but it held fast. The pins she'd found, the grease smudge, the scuffage, pointed to recent tampering. She recalled Clara's confession about Roland at the clock, and now Marsh's. Nocturnal activities added another layer. She found Marsh in the library, reviewing papers, his medical bag at his feet. "Dr. Marsh," she said, her tone gentle, "your walks must be invigorating." The vicar mentioned lights in the woods. "Have you seen anything unusual?" Marsh's pen paused, and he looked up, his eyes guarded. "Nothing but stars, Miss Marple. The woods are quiet, good for thinking." He smiled, but it was strained, and Miss Marple noted the mud on his shoes. Fresh, despite his claim of a morning in the village. "In my village," she said, "a doctor's rounds were always predictable. But night walks are so adventurous." She watched him closely, noting the slight twitch in his jaw. "My patients keep odd hours," he said, closing his papers. "Excuse me, I have notes to finish." He left his bag in hand, its clasp glinting. Miss Marple sat by the window, watching the garden. Clara was sketching near the herb garden, her movements nervous. Roland appeared, his easel absent, and spoke to her, his gestures urgent. Clara shook her head, and he walked away, his shoulders tense. Miss Marple's lips pursed. In St. Mary Mead, such exchanges often hid secrets, say lovers quarrel. A shared guilt. At tea, Beatrice announced a new loss. A pair of pearl earrings kept in her dressing table. "It's unbearable," she said, her voice breaking. "The house feels cursed." Roland swore softly. "We need to lock the doors tighter. Someone's sneaking in." Mrs. Poole, serving scones, snapped, "The doors are locked, Mr. Roland. It's someone inside. Mark my words." Her eyes lingered on Clara, who flushed botmarsh.com as ever, said, "Let's not accuse without proof. I'll check the locks." "Myself tonight." Miss Marple, sipping her tea, asked, "Dr. Marsh, do you ever carry anything in your bag besides medical supplies? It seems quite heavy." The room stilled. Marsh's smile was tight. "Just instruments, Miss Marple, a doctor's. Tools are many." But his hand rested protectively on the bag, and Miss Marple noted the lie. That evening, dinner was a formal affair, with Beatrice clinging to routine. Roland, in a dinner jacket, spoke of a London art dealer, but his eyes strayed to the clock, which struck 9 with a clear, ominous tone. Clara, in a pale dress, ate little, her hands trembling. Marsh discussed a medical conference, but his fingers toyed with his knife. Betraying tension, Mrs. Poole supervised with a fierce glare, her presence a silent rebuke. After dinner, Miss Marple lingered in the drawing room, her knitting a pretext. Roland excused himself, claiming a need to sketch, and Clara followed, her steps hesitant. Marsh announced a walk, his bag in hand, its weight noticeable. Miss Marple watched him go, noting the faint scent of tobacco knot his usual blend, but the cheap brand from the garden. At 10, she slipped into the garden, her shawl wrapped tightly. The moon was obscured by clouds, casting the lawn in darkness. She moved toward the summer house, her steps silent. Near the side gate, she found another matchstick, its tip scorched. She pocketed it, her mind linking it to Turner's cigarette ends. At 11, she saw a figure Marsh, his navy coat unmistakable, crossing the lawn. He paused by the summer house, looking around, then entered the woods. Miss Marple followed, her umbrella a cane, her heart steady. In the woods, she lost sight of him, but a faint murmur guided her to a clearing. Marsh stood with the same thin man from the previous night, their voices low. She caught fragments, the next delivery and the clock's time. Marsh handed the man a small package, and the stranger vanished into the trees. Miss Marple retreated, her mind racing. The package, the clock, Turner's note each pointed to a conspiracy. Back at the manor, she sat by her window, watching the garden. At midnight, the clock chimed 6 times, then a pause, then for more. A rustle followed, not a scream, from the summer house. She hurried downstairs, finding Roland in the hall, his face pale. Heard something, he muttered, thought it was the clock. Miss Marple smiled. It's lively tonight's, 6 and 4. She noted his boots, muddy despite his claim of staying indoors. In the summer house, she found the rug more askew, the floorboard loose. She pressed it, hearing a click, but did not lift it, wary of Roland's presence. Returning to her room, she wrote, Marsh, another meeting package. Roland, in summer house, muddy boots. Chimes, 6 and 4, a signal, floorboard, hiding what? Turner, linked to Marsh. The doctor's alibi was crumbling, but the clock's tick held the truth. Tomorrow, she would confront Marsh, search the summer house, and trace Turner's note. In St. Mary Mead, a doctor's bag had once held poison. Here, it might conceal a thief's spoils, or worse. Chapter 7, The Missing Link. The morning light crept into Chipping Manor with a hesitancy that mirrored the household's unease, casting faint shadows across the guest room where Miss Jane Marple sat, her notebook open before her, the clock's relentless chimes, the string of theft sapphire brooch, silver cigarette case, gold watch, pearl earrings, Clara's, repeated attacks. Dr. Marsh's clandestine meetings, Roland's furtive behavior, and the elusive John Turner with his satchel formed a puzzle that was nearing completion. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had once traced a missing ring to a gardener's shed through a single muddy footprint. Here, the link between Turner, the clock's hidden compartment, and the manor's secrets was tantalizingly close. She resolved to pursue it today, starting with the village and the trail of Turner's note. Breakfast was a muted affair, the dining room's opulence overshadowed by a palpable tension. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her face etched with exhaustion, stirred her tea absently, her eyes fixed on the window as if seeking answers in the misty grounds. Roland Harrow, his usual charm replaced by a haggard intensity, pushed his food around his plate, his fingers restless. Clara Vane, her bruises now faint shadows, sat with her hands clasped, her gaze avoiding Roland's. Dr. Edwin Marsh, his composure a thin veneer, spoke of a medical article, but his voice was strained, and Miss Marple noted a faint scratch on his hand, fresh and unexplained. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, served with a grim efficiency, her sharp eyes darting between the diners, as if expecting betrayal. Miss Marple, nibbling a piece of toast, observed them all, her mind weaving connections between Marsh's nocturnal dealings, Roland's muddy boots, and the cigarette ends tied to John Turner. "I thought I might visit the village again," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "The Red Lion Inn sounds like a charming place to learn more about local life. Perhaps I'll hear a story or two." Beatrice managed a weak smile. "Do be careful, Jane. The village is safe, but gossip travels fast." Roland's knife paused. "The Red Lion, full of rough types. Miss Marple, you'd do better at the tea shop." His voice was casual, but his eyes betrayed unease, and Miss Marple wondered if he feared what she might uncover. Clara murmured, "The inn's not so bad," but her voice trembled, and she looked down quickly. Marsh remained silent, his fingers tightening on his cup. Miss Marple smiled, her expression benign, but her mind was alert. Roland's deflection and Clara's nervousness suggested they knew of Turner's presence at the inn. Hawkins drove her to Chipping Norton, his silence as unyielding as ever. The high street was lively with villagers, their voices mingling with the clatter of market stalls. Miss Marple alighted at the Red Lion, in her umbrella, tapping the cobbles. The landlord, Mr. Tate, was behind the bar, polishing glasses with a practiced hand. "Back again, miss," he said, his tone wary, "still asking about that Turner chap." Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming. "Just tying up loose ends. You mentioned he left a note for someone. Did anyone else inquire about him?" Tate frowned, scratching his chin. "Not directly, but a man came in yesterday, asking if any strangers had been about. Tall, dark coat, didn't give a name. Looked like he didn't want to be noticed. Took the note, Turner left, and left quick." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The description matched Dr. Marsh, but she needed more. Did Turner mention where he was going after leaving? "Said something about London," Tate replied. "Had a train ticket in his pocket. I saw it when he paid. Looked nervy, kept checking his watch." Thanking him, Miss Marple stepped outside, her mind racing. Turner's departure to London, the note, the stranger in the dark coat each, pointed to a connection with the manor. She visited the post office, hoping Mrs. Elton had more to share. The postmistress was sorting parcels, her eyes lighting up at Miss Marple's arrival. "Chasing more village secrets, miss." Miss Marple chuckled. "Just a postcard for my nephew. But I wondered if John Turner received any replies to his parcel." Mrs. Elton shook her head. "Nothing came for him, but I heard from the station master. He caught the early train to London 2 days ago. Had that satchel with him, stuffed full. Looked like he was running from something." Miss Marple thanked her and bought a postcard, her thoughts turning to her nephew. Raymond West. She had asked him to trace the London pawnshop linked to Turner's parcel. A reply might confirm if the stolen items brooch, cigarette case, watch, earrings had been sent there. She wrote a brief note, urging him to check for a satchel marked JT, and sent it off, her mind linking the parcel to the clock's compartment, returning to the manor. She found Beatrice in the drawing room, sorting old photographs with trembling hands. "Jane, any news from the village?" Beatrice asked, her voice frail. "The Red Lion is quite lively," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "I heard of a young man, John Turner, who left for London. Does the name mean anything?" Beatrice's fingers froze. "Turner? No, I don't think so. But we've had so many visitors over the years." Her hesitation was telling, and Miss Marple noted it, suspecting Beatrice knew more than she admitted. At lunch, Roland was absent, claiming a painting session, and Clara, pale and withdrawn, ate little. Dr. Marsh discussed a new patient, but his eyes strayed to the window, as if watching the garden. Mrs. Poole served with a scowl, muttering about strangers meddling. Miss Marple, sipping her soup, asked, "Does anyone know a London pawnbroker? I heard in the village of parcels being sent there." The room stilled. Clara's spoon clinked, and Marsh's fork paused. "Pawnbrokers," Marsh said smoothly. "Common enough in London. Why do you ask?" "Oh, just village talk," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "In my village, a pawnbroker once held a stolen ring. Curious places, aren't they?" She watched their reactions, Clara's flush, Marsh's sudden focus on his plate, Mrs. Poole's sharp glance. After lunch, Miss Marple lingered in the hall, drawn to the clock. The scratch on its base was unchanged, but she noticed a faint dust pattern on the floor, as if the clock had been moved slightly. She pressed the panel, feeling the familiar give, but it held fast. The grease smudge, the pins, suggested recent use, perhaps by Roland, as Clara had hinted, or by Marsh, whose bag might conceal tools. She found Clara in the garden, sketching near the herb garden, her hands trembling. "Miss Vane," Miss Marple said gently, "you mentioned Roland at the clock. Did he say anything about a compartment?" Clara's pencil snapped, and she looked up, her eyes wide. "I shouldn't have said anything. He was just curious. That's all. He's in debt, Miss Marple, terrible debt. He's been meeting someone in the village, someone who frightens him." Her voice broke, and Miss Marple patted her hand. "In my village," Miss Marple said, "a young man in debt sold his mother's silver. Secrets only grow heavier, my dear. If you know more, it's best to share." Clara shook her head, tears welling. "I can't. He'd never forgive me." She fled to the house, leaving her sketchbook behind. Miss Marple picked it up, noting a rough drawing of the clock, its base circled in ink. A clue, perhaps, or a fear. At tea, Beatrice announced another theft, a diamond tie pin. Her late husband's, missing from a locked box in her study. "It's too much," she said, her voice trembling. "The house is against us." Roland, returning from his studio, swore softly. "We need to call the police. This is no coincidence." Mrs. Poole, serving scones, snapped, "Police. They'll only upset the house. It's someone here, I say." Her eyes lingered on Clara, who flinched. Marsh.com as ever, said, "Let's not panic. I'll check the locks again tonight." His hand rested on his bag, and Miss Marple noted its weight. "Heavier than yesterday?" she asked. "Dr. Marsh, have you ever met a John Turner?" "The village mentions him often." Marsh's smile was tight. "Never heard of him. A transient, no doubt." But his eyes darted to Roland, who looked down quickly. Miss Marple smiled. "No doubt," but her mind noted their reactions. Deflection, Roland's unease, Clara's silence. In St. Mary Mead, a stranger's name had once unmasked a forger. Here, Turner was the missing link. That evening, dinner was formal, with Beatrice clinging to tradition. Roland, in a dinner jacket, spoke of a new painting, but his eyes strayed to the clock, which struck 10 with a clear, ominous tone. Clara, in a pale dress, ate little, her hands trembling. Marsh discussed a medical case, but his fingers toyed with his glass. Betraying tension, Mrs. Poole supervised with a fierce glare, her presence a silent rebuke. After dinner, Miss Marple lingered. In the drawing room, her knitting a pretext, Roland excused himself, claiming a need to sketch, and Clara followed, her steps hesitant. Marsh announced a walk, his bag in hand, its clasp glinting. Miss Marple watched him go, noting the faint scent of cheap tobacco, not his usual blend. But the brand from the garden at 10. She slipped into the garden, her shawl wrapped tightly. The moon was hidden, casting the lawn in darkness. She moved toward the summer house, her steps silent. Near the side gate, she found another cigarette end, confirming Turner's lingering presence. At 11, she saw a figure Marsh, his navy coat unmistakable, crossing the lawn. He paused by the summer house, then entered the woods. Miss Marple followed, her umbrella a cane, her heart steady. In the woods, she caught sight of him with the same thin man, their voices low. She heard fragments, the last item and the clock's signal. Marsh handed the man a small package, and the stranger vanished. Miss Marple retreated, her mind racing. The package, the chimes, Turner's note each, pointed to a conspiracy. Back at the manor, she sat by her window, watching the garden. At midnight, the clock chimed 7 times, then a pause, then 2 more. A rustle followed from the summer house. She hurried downstairs, finding Clara in the hall, her face pale. "I heard something," Clara whispered, "in the garden." Miss Marple led her to the summer house, finding the door ajar. Inside, the rug was askew, the floorboard loose. She lifted it, revealing a small cavity containing a velvet pouch. Inside was a single pearl earring Beatrice's. Miss Marple pocketed it, her mind linking it to the clock's compartment. Returning to her room, she wrote, "Earring in summer house, linked to clock." Marsh, another package. Turner, the stranger. Chimes, 7 and 2, a code. Roland, debts, involved. The missing link was close, but the clock's tick held the truth. Tomorrow, she would confront Marsh, search the clock, and trace Turner's trail. In St. Mary Mead, a hidden pouch had once revealed a thief. Here, it might unmask a darker scheme. Chapter 8, asterisk, the clock strikes truth. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Chipping Manor, casting a tentative glow over the guest room where Miss Jane Marple sat. Her notebook a mosaic of clues meticulously gathered over the past days. The clock's erratic chimes, the string of theft sapphire brooch, silver cigarette case, gold watch, pearl earrings, diamond tie Pinkler-ass attacks, Dr. Marsh's clandestine meetings, Roland's furtive behavior, the anonymous note, the summer house's secrets, and the elusive John Turner with his initialed satchel had woven a tapestry of deceit. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple had once solved a poisoning by noting a misplaced teacup. Here, the clock's hidden compartment and its chimes held the truth, and she felt the moment had come to unravel the mystery. Tonight, she would gather the household and let the clock strike true. Breakfast was a somber affair, the dining room's grandeur dimmed by the weight of suspicion. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her face etched with strain, sipped tea with trembling hands, her eyes darting to the hall where the clock ticked relentlessly. Roland Harrow, his charm long eroded, ate little, his fingers restless on the tablecloth. Clara, vain, her bruises nearly gone but her demeanor fragile, sat with her hands clasped, avoiding Roland's gaze. Dr. Edwin Marsh, his composure a fragile mask, spoke of a new medical theory, but his eyes betrayed unease. And Miss Marple noted a fresh scratch on his wrist, faint but telling. Mrs. Poole, the housekeeper, served with a grim intensity, her sharp glances sweeping the room like a searchlight. Miss Marple, nibbling a scone, observed them all, her mind piecing together the final thread. Turner's note, Marsh's packages, the summer house's pouch, and the clock's coded chimes. "I thought we might gather in the hall tonight," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. The clock's behavior is so curious. Perhaps together we can understand its quirks. Beatrice nodded, her relief tinged with fear. A good idea, Jane. This house needs answers. Roland's fork paused. The clock again. It's just a broken machine, Miss Marple. His voice was sharp, but his eyes flickered with unease, and Miss Marple noted the mud on his boots. Fresh, despite his claim of staying indoors, Clara murmured, "It's unsettling," and looked down quickly. Marsh remained silent, his fingers tightening on his cup. Miss Marple smiled, her expression benign, but her mind was alert. Roland's deflection and Clara's fear confirmed her suspicions. The clock was the heart of the mystery, and the household knew more than they admitted. After breakfast, Miss Marple slipped into the hall, drawn to the clock. The scratch on its base was unchanged, but she noticed a faint mark on the floor, as if the clock had been shifted slightly. She pressed the panel, feeling the familiar give, and this time, a soft click rewarded her efforts. The panel opened, revealing a small compartment, empty but polished, its edges worn from recent use. She closed it carefully, her mind linking it to the pearl earring in the summer house's floorboard. The clock was a hiding place, but for whom and why she visited. The garden, her umbrella tapping the path. The summer house stood silent, its door still locked. She peered through the loose window, noting the rug's position still askew. The floorboard undisturbed since her discovery of the earring. She found another cigarette end near the side gate, its cheap brand matching those linked to John Turner. Pocketing it, she recalled the note he'd left at the Red Lion Inn and the stranger likely Marsh who had collected it. The woods beyond the gate were quiet, but a faint trail of broken twigs suggested recent passage. Marsh's meetings, she was certain, were tied to the thefts. Returning to the manor, she found Beatrice in the library, sorting old letters with trembling hands. "Jane, have you found anything?" Beatrice asked, her voice thin. "Bits and pieces," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "The clock is most intriguing. Did your husband ever mention a hidden compartment in it?" Beatrice frowned. "No, but it's an old piece, full of secrets. He loved its history French, from a chateau," he said. Her hesitation suggested she knew more, and Miss Marple made a mental note to probe later at lunch. Roland was present, but distracted, his eyes straying to the window. Clara, pale and silent, ate little, her hands twisting a napkin. Dr. Marsh discussed a patient, but his voice lacked conviction, and Miss Marple noted a faint tremor in his hand. Mrs. Poole served with a scowl, muttering about thieves and liars. Miss Marple, sipping her soup, asked, "Dr. Marsh, do you ever meet colleagues in the woods?" The vicar mentioned lights there, quite late. Marsh's spoon paused. "Colleagues? No, just my walks, Miss Marple. The woods are quiet. Good for reflection." His smile was tight, and Miss Marple noted the lie his wrists scratch matched the brambles she'd seen near the clearing. "In my village," she said, "a doctor's night calls were always explained, but woods at midnight are so mysterious." She watched him closely, noting the faint flush on his cheeks. Roland snorted. "Mysterious, more like foolish. You'll catch a chill, Marsh." His tone held an edge, and Miss Marple wondered if he suspected Marsh's true purpose. After lunch, she found Clara in the drawing room, staring at a sketch of the clock. "Miss Vane," Miss Marple said gently, "you seem troubled. Is it Roland's debts or something else?" Clara's hands trembled, and she dropped her pencil. I shouldn't say he's desperate, Miss Marple. He's been meeting someone in the village, someone dangerous. I saw him hide something in the clock, but I don't know what." Her voice broke, and Miss Marple patted her hand. "In my village," Miss Marple said, "a young girl hid a letter to protect her brother. Secrets only hurt, my dear. If you know more, it's best to share." Clara shook her head, tears welling. "I can't. He'd hate me." She fled, leaving her sketchbook open to the clock's drawing, its compartments circled in ink-dotted T. Beatrice announced another loss, a ruby ring kept in her jewelry box. "It's unbearable," she said, her voice breaking. "The house is cursed." Roland swore softly. "We need to search every room. This is madness." Mrs. Poole, serving scones, snapped, "Search the servants." "I'll not have it, Mr. Roland." Her eyes lingered on Clara, who flinched. Marsh.com, as ever, said, "Let's stay rational. I'll check the locks again tonight." His hand rested on his bag, and Miss Marple noted its weight. "Heavier than ever?" she asked. "Dr. Marsh, have you ever treated a John Turner? The village mentions him often." Marsh's smile was strained. "No, never. A stranger, likely." But his eyes darted to Roland, who looked down quickly. Miss Marple smiled. "Likely." But her mind noted their reactions: Marsh's deflection, Roland's unease, Clara's fear. In St. Mary Mead, a stranger's name had once unmasked a swindler. Here, Turner was the link to the clock's secrets. That evening, Miss Marple gathered the household in the hall, the clock looming behind her like a silent judge. Beatrice sat on a velvet chair, her hands clasped. Roland stood by the window, his face tense. Clara hovered near him, her eyes downcast. Dr. Marsh leaned against the wall, his bag at his feet. Mrs. Poole stood by the door, her arms crossed. Miss Marple, her knitting in her lap, began, her voice calm but firm. "The clock," she said, "is more than a timekeeper. It's a hiding place and a signal. Its chimes 5, 6, 7, with pauses are not random. They're a code meant to communicate with someone outside." Beatrice gasped. "A code? But who?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Let us start with the thefts. The brooch, cigarette case, watch, earrings, tie-pin, ring all missing, all small enough to fit in the clock's compartment. I found it this morning, empty but polished, as Mr. Grayson described. Someone has been using it to hide stolen goods." Roland shifted. "That's absurd. The clock's just broken." Miss Marple continued, undeterred. "Roland, you're in debt, as Clara confided. You've been meeting someone in the village, a man named John Turner, I believe. You hid the stolen items in the clock, passing them to him through the summer house, where I found a pearl earring." Roland paled. "That's nonsense." "I'd never," Clara interrupted, her voice trembling. "It's true, Roland. I saw you at the clock. I was afraid to say." Miss Marple raised a hand. "The chimes were signals to Turner, mistimed because you're no clockmaker. But someone else knew, someone who attacked Clara to keep her silent." Mrs. Poole stepped forward, her face ashen. "I did it," she whispered. "I saw Miss Vane near the clock, snooping. I thought she'd ruin Mr. Roland. I only meant to scare her, not hurt her." Beatrice gasped, and Roland swore. Miss Marple nodded. "Mrs. Poole, your loyalty is commendable, but misguided. You struck Clara twice, thinking she'd expose Roland's thefts." Marsh cleared his throat. "This is all very dramatic, but what of me? I've done nothing but my duties." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Dr. Marsh, Your walks were no exercise. You met Turner in the woods, passing packages, likely the stolen items. I saw you, and the cigarette ends you left, not your usual brand, match Turner's. You lent Roland money, knowing he'd steal to repay you, and you profited by fencing the goods. Marsh's face hardened. Prove it. Miss Marple smiled. The ink on your cuff, the scratches from brambles, your heavy baguette, all points to you. And Turner's note, collected by you, confirms your role. My nephew is tracing his parcel. In London, we'll soon know its contents. Roland broke, his voice hoarse. It's true. I stole to pay Marsh. He said he'd ruin me if I didn't. Turner was his contact, taking the goods to London. Beatrice wept, and Clara clutched Roland's hand. Mrs. Poole sank into a chair, her face in her hands. Marsh, cornered, said nothing, his bag a silent confession. Miss Marple concluded. The clock struck true, revealing greed, loyalty, and fear. Roland, you'll return what's left. Dr. Marsh, the police will want a word. Mrs. Poole, your loyalty led you astray, but Clara is safe now. The clock chimed midnight 12. Clear strokes, no more. Beatrice gasped. It's normal. Again, Miss Marple smiled. Sometimes, truth sets even clocks right. She closed her notebook, the puzzle complete. In St. Mary Mead, a clock's silence had once betrayed a thief. Here, its voice unmasked a conspiracy. As the household dispersed, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting resumed. Tomorrow, she would return to St. Mary Mead, where simpler mysteries awaited. For now, Chipping Manor was quiet, its secrets laid bare by the clock that struck true. The end.